Good afternoon and welcome to the Homes at the Heart webinar. My name is Lucy Grove and I'm the Director of Strategic Communications and Campaigns at the National Housing Federation. Today we're going to be discussing the Homes at the Heart campaign, so where it's come from, what it's achieved so far and where we want to take it next. Joining me today are two additional speakers, James Prestwich from the Chartered Institute of Housing and Chloe Fletcher from the National Federation of Almos. We also have support from James Grant in our digital team and Becca Murphy, our events manager. Can I have the next slide, please? If this is your first go-to webinar, here are a few things to look out for in your dashboard. You can close the panel using the red arrows so you can see more of the speakers and presentation. If you have issues with the sound, check the audio tab. Feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. You can do this in the questions tab in your GoToWebinar dashboard, and we'll take questions during the webinar and try to answer as many as possible in the Q&A section. Please note that we'll only be able to answer questions that were sent during the presentation and not after it. It's also worth noting that we'll be sending all attendees an email over the next week or so, which will include a link to the recording of the webinar, and the slides from today's session will be available for download with that link. Okay, so now I'm going to kick off with today's webinar with an overview of where the Homes at the Heart campaign has come from, before James and Chloe run through what we have achieved so far and where we are heading next. Could I have the next slide, please? So in the past 3 months, the National Housing Federation, Chartered Institute of Housing, Crisis, the Association for Retained Council Housing and the National Federation of Almos have all been working to help our members and stakeholders to navigate these extraordinary times. This has included providing practical support and representing your views to government as you work through the many huge challenges the crisis has created, so that you can continue to provide the homes and services your communities need. Could I have the next slide, please? Our support has also included thinking about the role housing needs to play in the country's economic and social recovery, and lobbying political stakeholders for the technical changes needed to make this happen. But we all realised early on that to get traction with these policy interventions, we also need to be speaking boldly and proudly about the vital role social housing can play in getting the country back on track. Decided to collaborate behind one single social housing campaign, Homes at the Heart. So much has changed in such a short amount of time in England, in the UK and across the world. During the pandemic, we've come to see home in a whole new light, and the crisis has highlighted how the places that we live are a sanctuary for some people and a prison for many others. Everyone deserves a safe, secure, comfortable place to call home, not just now in the middle of the crisis, but always. And as we all know, everyone on this webinar will know, that investing in social housing and support for people to live well makes this possible. It also boosts the economy, creates jobs and improves people's lives when our nation needs it the most. That's why our 5 organisations, so again that's Arch, CIH, Crisis, NFA and the NHF, come together to deliver a clear message that homes must be at the heart of recovery, with a once-in-a-generation investment in social housing. So this public-facing campaign is about demonstrating a broad base of support for the principle of investing in social housing. Importantly, as well as collaborating across our 5 organisations, we wanted to create a broad and impressive, influential and kind of unexpected coalition of organisations to take with us. And also for our activities to be targeted and thinking about our audiences in terms of how to create the biggest and highest impact in what is quite a challenging time to campaign. Crucially, we'll know we'll be successful if key political figures are talking publicly in support of social housing, that there is a pro-social housing policies coming forward, there is increased kind of public support for social housing, we've created a broad, impressive, and as I said, influential coalition behind the importance of social housing for the economy and society, who are willing to take actions on behalf of the campaign. And our members and stakeholders feel their part of something special and are excited to support the campaign. Importantly, we want the campaign to really focus on real stories and bring to the fore the brilliant work that housing providers and the sector do, and the ways in which genuinely affordable housing has improved people's lives and made things possible for people. So importantly, the campaign will really focus on a lot of those personal stories and bring out a diversity of story as well, so we can show the breadth of society that's touched by social housing. So I'm going to hand over to James Prestwich now from the Chartered Institute of Housing. So if we could have the next slide, please. And James is going to talk us through the activity so far, and so where we've got to and what we've achieved so far, before starting to talk about where we want to take the campaign next.
Thanks very much, Lucy. It's really nice to be here. So Homes at the Heart, and hopefully all of you that are joining the webinar will have seen this. Launched on 25th of June with an open letter to the Chancellor, and that was signed by over 60 campaign supporters. In that letter, we call for the Chancellor to place investment in social housing at the very heart of the government's plans for the economic and societal recovery from the COVID pandemic. Signatories to that letter hopefully reflected the depth and the breadth of the support that we've got for the campaign, with signatories including Save the Children and NatWest. We got some really positive coverage of the letter in the Times, which again many of you will have seen. So a really positive start to the campaign. That was combined with a big push across social media channels over a number of days. And the launch week culminated with some polling data that we'd produced, which evidenced quite clearly people's experiences of home, and that was picked up extensively across the press, with the feature in the Sun, Channel 4 News, and also on LBC. Since that point, we've carried on releasing other stats and graphics to across social media to help reinforce the message and to continue to give life to the campaign. The new Conservative MP Sean Bailey wrote a really powerful comment piece for Conservative Home, which is the really influential Conservative blogging page, and that piece was a very personal piece about how social housing had saved him and his family after his mum had to flee due to domestic abuse. On the launch day alone, we had over 500 people tweeting with the Homes at the Heart hashtag. This had the potential to reach over 1.2 million people, which is a really great result for one day, and we were delighted with how the campaign landed. Very grateful to all our members for the support that they showed. That's my dog barking, I apologise. So if we can just have the next slide now, please. And what I'll do now is I'll look to outline how we sustain momentum, and I'll quickly let my dog out. Hang on. There we go. Just so you know that it's live. So how are we going to look to sustain momentum as we build towards an autumn spending review, which is really the government's opportunity to grasp the nettle and place social housing at the centre of the nation's recovery from COVID. So what we've got to try and do is ensure that Homes at the Heart is about much more than just that launch, popular and successful as it was. And we really need to make sure that we push the Homes at the Heart message from now right the way through to the comprehensive spending review, which we know is going to be in the autumn. So the way we're going to look to do that is to shine a light on the many different ways, both economic and social, that social housing improves people's lives across a series of themed weeks, which are going to start at the beginning of August. So you can see what they are there, and I'm not proposing to go through any of those in detail, but hopefully that sets out very clearly the structured approach that we're going to look to do as we build towards spending review. So across these themed weeks, we're going to be creating content with members, with our supporters, to share across social media platforms, in the press and with politicians as well. So there's going to be video and photo case studies, blogs, infographics, comment pieces and audio clips, which are going to deliver some key messages to reinforce those different elements and those different themes of the campaign. And that will culminate in a parliamentary lobbying activity in the early autumn, where of course things will begin to get quite frenetic in the lead up to the spending review. So you'll all be glad that I can mute, so you won't be able to hear any more barking, and I'll hand over to Chloe now.
Thank you, James. Yes, so building on that, political engagement is obviously key to us getting that message across to the real decision makers. And what we want is to work with members and stakeholders to target key influencers across parties and across the country to help get that message across. We'll be focusing on MPs, councillors, mayors and other people who can influence the political thinking, particularly in those red wall areas, and really trying to get to the public in those areas. And the other key seats that we think social housing messages and the new way that the government was trying to level up before COVID will really land and be heard. We want to gather, oh, sorry, I've started speaking and not asked to go on to the next slide, so you can't see some of the, the wonderful points that I'll be making. Could you move the, thank you. So yes, targeting key seats and areas. Demonstrating that broad support is really key to getting this message across. So we want to gather support, as I say, sort of cross party, but also across both houses. So looking at Lords as well as MPs and making sure everyone understands that broad, clear message that we want to put social housing at the heart of the recovery. We will continue to use our opportunities across all of our organisations when we're meeting with civil servants and other policy advisors to government to make sure that we champion these messages, and we need your help to do that. Next slide, please. So this is what we want you to do to help us, help you, as it were. Obviously, you have probably got good relationships, I hope, and certainly are in a better place than some of us at the centre to develop those local relationships with your key politicians, be that councillors, mayors, MPs. What we want you to do is to use some of the resources that we'll be preparing over the next few weeks to contact those key politicians, share your local stories, invite them in to come and see some of your brilliant schemes and homes, and if possible either virtually or safely in person, meet with some of the tenants and communities that you've managed to help over your times in these communities. We really need to get that real, as Lucy was saying right at the beginning, the real stories out, and the best way often is for tenants to be able to tell their own stories directly to local politicians. We really find that in the House that's sometimes what makes the big difference between somebody taking on board what they know, to be true and what we're telling them, but it's pulling at the heartstrings and really seeing it on the ground that makes such a difference, and you're key to us achieving that throughout this campaign. As I said, we'll be making some campaign tools, and we'll have a poster maker out soon, so that you can use that to add your own content and use that on social media. We'll be giving you template materials to help with getting those messages out to MPs and politicians, and really just asking for blogs and case studies and helping you get all of those messages out. We'll be looking for those case studies, particularly over those themed weeks, as James set out. I know from my perspective, I've already started talking to our new supply group for some nice pictures and nice stories about people moving into new homes, or things that have really made a difference to people's lives that we think will be interesting to the press and other wider stakeholders. But we also want you to start talking to people that you deal with every day in your businesses, your finance contacts, the charities that you work with, the partnerships that you have locally, to see if we can continue to build on that really fantastic broad supporter base that we've got, and get others to be our advocates in this campaign. So back over to Lucy. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Chloe. If we could just skip on to the final slide. So we're at the point now where we can start taking questions. That was a bit of a whistle-stop tour through where we're going to go next with the campaign. We'll be sending out information to all of our relative members later on this week or the very beginning of next, which details much more information about those themes, what they're going to focus in on, and the ways in which we would like you to get involved, and the tools we'll be providing you with so you can do that. We have got a bit of time now to answer any questions that have come in. So I'll move straight across to answering. I've got a question here about what's the plan to build a wider coalition beyond the kind of the usual suspects and the normal people we've got involved. I'll hand it over to James in a second. I think, but I just wanted to touch on the fact that, so at the moment, amongst those 60 stakeholders that we've got supporting it, I'd really encourage you to go on to the website and check out the supporter page, because it shows the logos of everyone involved. And we're really pleased so far that we've actually, we feel there is, we're already building quite a good breadth. We know we could do better, and we know there are more people we can get on board, but we've got kind of regional chambers of commerce on there. We've got bank and another bank that are looking to come on board. The likes, as I said, of Save the Children, Carers UK, so different avenues there in terms of, and the Refugee Council, so different kinds of charitable organisations that want to support us, the Building Society Association, and various other, you know, what is largely seen as more a kind of finance-driven organisation. So I'd really encourage you to get on board to check out those people. But James, I didn't know if you wanted to talk at all about, you know, thoughts on how we can build an even broader coalition of people.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. I mean, I think you gave a fantastic answer just by referring to some of the organisations that are already signed up as supporters, and I suppose what I wanted to say is that's why I feel like this this campaign has got the potential to succeed in a way that maybe previous campaigns haven't, and you know, so why is that? Well, I guess there is a danger that sometimes housing can operate in a little bit of an echo chamber where, if we're not careful, we are as a sector just speaking to ourselves about some of the issues, and really the argument's probably been won across the sector in terms of what's needed, you know, in the delivery of social homes. So it's really important that we look to break out of that echo chamber and make sure that we're able to amplify that voice across the sector. So that's why I think we've been, you know, this is very different, and that's why it's so important that we've got that breadth of supporters on board already. But it's important to continue to try and build that consensus. I don't think there's any secrets to that really, but that's where our members, you know, of our different organisations and supporters of different organisations are able to work with us to look to try and help that and help expand the number of supporters that we've got through the local connections and the pre-existing networks that they've got.
Great, thanks, James. There's another question here about, is there a plan to also focus part of the messaging around the kind of the key worker agenda, so nurses, the NHS, teachers, etc., and where does that fit in? Chloe, I didn't know if you wanted to answer that one. I can chip in as well.
Not particularly at the moment. As Lucy was saying right at the beginning, we want to keep this campaign very much high level, broad based, focused on the need for social rented housing across the board for key workers, as well as, you know, people stuck in TA and everyone else in between. That way we just think we'll keep the message as clear as possible, as simple as possible, and then everybody else, and we know, you know, G15 have been working on that particular aspect of it, and as will others within the sector, but everyone can do that work underneath this broad kind of overarching, clear, higher level message. So I don't know, Lucy, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think that's right, that we want to keep the messaging very broad about the broad good. There may if James, if you could perhaps, James Grant, if you could perhaps skip back to the slides about the themed weeks.
The themed weeks, yes.
Obviously, when we're talking about themed weeks, one of the weeks is Homes at the Heart of Making Ends Meet, which is about affordability and the kind of affordability crisis. We will want to bring in lots of different stories of affordability. So like Chloe says, that there'll be instances where we want to talk about families that are in temporary accommodation and what it feels like to be really struggling with all of your costs as a family. But it may be there that there'll be conversations around certain particular groups of people that are struggling to afford housing. So there could be the space for the stories of people like nurses and other frontline workers, and actually importantly key workers in its broadest sense, of people who have been stocking shelves at supermarkets through the pandemic. But it will very much be, rather than focusing on a policy solution driven particularly at that group, it will be about highlighting, as we said, the many different ways that social housing can help lots of different people. And that's probably the week where it'll fit most comfortably under. I didn't know, James, if you had anything to add at all.
No, not really. No, I mean, I think I agree with you, Lucy. It fits most under that theme. But I think, as always, there'll be a lot of overlap with a lot of these themes and a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about. You could talk about them in any number of the themed weeks.
Yeah. Yes, I could also see a good fit with the Living Well theme for carers who are caring for people in supported housing, but may also need affordable housing themselves because they're working for minimum wage. So,
yeah, absolutely. We've got a question here about reflecting. So there are a number of comments that have come in about case studies and getting in touch and wanting to offer case studies up, which is absolutely fantastic. So what we'll be doing with comms that goes out later this week, we're looking at setting up an email address that those offers can be directed to, so we can work with the individual organisations and talk to you about your case studies and find out more about how the kind of best format for us to present those case studies in. So whether that's video content, graphics, images, whether we want to think about how that case study could be used in media stories, all those kinds of things. So that, again, in the email that goes around later this week, we'll be able to explain where you can direct all these wonderful offers to, and we very much appreciate this. We also have something about how do you want us to use our contacts, so other than MPs and councillors, to be advocates. So where Chloe talked there about how do we want people to get involved. James, did you have any thoughts on that at all?
I think again that probably ties into the point I made previously about the pre-existing networks and relationships that members across the partner organisations have got. So what this absolutely isn't about is a kind of top-down campaign where those partner organisations are seeking to try and tell people what we think you should do to look to engage political stakeholders, particularly in your local area. You've got those relationships, you have that knowledge, and it feels absolutely right that it needs to be members on the ground in their local area who are seeking to use the overarching campaign as the means to get into the door and start to talk to some of those local opinion formers and influential figures to try and get them on board and to continue to bang the drum for Homes at the Heart across the country.
I just wanted to add that I also think this is part of building that mood music over the summer to help inform, we hope, their Chancellor's decisions for the autumn statement, as James was saying. And I think obviously we're asking you for case studies and blogs, but if some of your supporters would like to write a blog or do a video talk, that would be brilliant. And if they're willing to talk and get their blogs out in their trade press or their contacts. It just helps that whole message ripple out. So absolutely sign up, get them to sign up as supporters. We'll add their logos to the page, but also if they're willing to advocate on our behalf, please let us know, and we can set them up with opportunities for blogs and various things.
We've had a question about platforms and also somebody talking about social media petitions. They're probably good to take it together. So which platforms would we like people to use? And is there the idea of a social media petition? In terms of platforms, we've typically been using Twitter quite strongly at the moment, because we know that reaches the decision makers. That's the kind of the last place where actually often the decision makers are still in control of their accounts. So it's a helpful place to reach the government ministers and officials, but also across other social media platforms. So we've been promoting it on Facebook and on Instagram pages. So we would really encourage our members to do that across. We'll be providing content and suitable graphics for across all of the social media platforms. I think where we talk about a social media petition, in looking at where to take this next, there'll definitely be room and a push around petitioning MPs and writing to MPs and encouraging them to support the campaign. And I think that's where we want to be able to channel that energy in getting MPs to demonstrate their support, particularly on social media. And hopefully we're looking at things like being able to record a video in support, and maybe creating content from that that demonstrates the kind of breadth of political support for that. So that's where we're focusing our petitioning, is members petitioning MPs to then petition the government, because I think at the moment we're just aware that's probably going to have the most traction with this particular government. I didn't know if Chloe or James, you wanted to add anything else there at all?
No, I think you've covered it, Lucy. I think that's
I'm just looking at whether we've got any more questions here. We've got a question here about which one of these categories do you think that the subject social housing promoting diversity within communities would fit in? Chloe or James, did you want to step in there at all?
I mean, I again, I think, and we don't want the different themes to almost become kind of siloed, really. So again, that feels like something that sits across some of those themes, particularly around prosperous communities and living well, which feel like they resonate. But I think again, things are applicable across the board, really, and let's not.
And I would hope actually that sort of theme runs through all of them, because I would hope that we will get the case studies from all of you across the country that will show that diversity of need and the diversity of communities that you're working with, and we would be able to show that is totally ingrained in what social housing does across all of those themes. So.
Yeah, I completely agree. We've been discussing this, and I think it is absolutely, we're committed to making sure that through the content that we're displaying, through the language we're using, through the stories we're telling, we are showing a breadth of experience. We're showing a true breadth of experience in terms of the communities that you work with. We're showing a true breadth of experience in terms of the people who are using services that we provide and are living in the homes that we provide, and making sure that we're really demonstrating just the diversity of the communities and lives that you all touch. So for me, again, as these guys have said, absolutely going to be a thread throughout that we're absolutely showing diversity as being a crucial and important part. I think where you're talking about, particularly in communities, I think we're all advocates for diverse, mixed communities of different cultures, of different economic groups of just having a prosperous community, is a community where there is cohesion and diversity and all of those things. So I think absolutely there'll be a space there as well to really make the case and the point for having wonderfully diverse communities. We have a couple of questions here about specific policy asks about the importance of whether there'll be any chance to focus on the importance of accessibility standards, and also a question about the scale up of housing first. I mean, for me, this points back, Chloe, to the point you made earlier on, that all of our individual organisations will be pushing forward specific policy asks, but the campaign itself will focus on the broad top line messages, so that each of our individual organisations can work with our members on the technical asks beneath that. Do you think that's kind of a fair assessment there, Chloe?
Yes, absolutely. And it may well be that in some of those themes, we will be able to get into a bit more of the detail around some of the asks. And we at the NFA will be, using the theme of the settled futures and the homelessness work to talk about housing first, and to talk about, some of the work our members have done in that space, and what a difference it makes, and making the absolute ask that I think everyone across that sector knows about, the need for revenue funding going forward, and a proper 5-year settlement, so that you're working in a settled financial way, and you can commit to those kinds of projects. And I'm sure under each of those we will each be doing that. And when we're talking to civil servants and things, obviously we start getting down to that technical detail, but for the campaign itself, absolutely just need to get that clear message out that social housing is at the heart of the recovery, and it will hit all of these buttons that we want, that the government want to hit, and that we want to hit.
Right, that's really helpful. Thank you, Chloe. I'm just looking across the questions we have remaining. Again, we've got questions around seeking investment in energy efficiency as part of the greener country. Absolutely, that will touch on things like decarbonisation, retrofit. That's absolutely where we talk about investment in social housing across this campaign. It's quite important to note that we're talking about investment in building homes, but importantly, we're talking about investment in existing homes, and we're talking about investment in support for people to live well in those homes. So it isn't about house building alone. That will be a part of it, but absolutely where we know that the decarbonisation agenda is hugely important to the future of our country in terms of our response to climate change, but is actually also an economic benefit in terms of thinking about the jobs it creates in the first instance, but then the economic benefits of having much more energy efficient homes. I'm just looking again at there was another great question here, which is what will success look like at the spending review? James, I don't know if you wanted to touch on that at all.
Wow, that's a difficult one. I think we'll all have different views, I think, won't we, on what success looks like, but clearly a considerable uplift in terms of the level of investment in new and crucially, as you talked about, Lucy, in your previous answer, existing social housing stock will look like success. This is still the early days of a new government. Whatever people's political persuasions, clearly there have been other issues that government have been very focused on, and what that probably has meant is that we haven't necessarily at this point got a clear sense of where this government is in terms of its approach towards social housing in particular. We've maybe had some hints from the Prime Minister's speech a couple of weeks ago and from the summer statement, but spending review will really be that first opportunity for us to be able, I think, to take a step back and say, right, so this is what the government's view is of social housing and its centrality to the recovery or otherwise. From that point of view, I think if we can just make sure through this campaign that we're talking about social housing as much as possible in the run up to spending review, then we can assess where we get to after that.
Yeah, absolutely. The focus on the spending review the reason we focus on creating such a broad coalition is that we know that, as James said, you know, the housing sector alone speaking about the good of social housing is not going to cut through to reach the government on the spending review and to change their decision making about what they want to spend money on at that point. But if we're building a broad coalition which demonstrates a real breadth of support from across different areas of society, different areas of business about why investment in social housing is important, we'll be in a much stronger position to reach what James said as success is you know, social housing and investment in social housing, existing, new, and support for people to be well, featuring in the comprehensive spending review and being a kind of pillar of that review we'll know we've reached success at that point. We're coming to the end of our questions now, so I'm going to wrap up slightly earlier. Thank you so much for everyone who's attended the session today. As we said, we're going to be able to send around the slides and send around a link to the recording of the webinar in a few days, and you'll all be communicated with about the next steps for the campaign, how you can get involved, and as I said, some given advice about who to go to with your offers of support and which email addresses to contact. We've also got a quick poll that's going to be coming up now. There's the quick poll. So if you could please answer that would be much appreciated. And please do get in touch with the National Housing Federation, Arch, CIH, Crisis, or the National Federation of Almos if you have any questions about the campaign. Thank you very much.
Thank you.